This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech plays in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
So welcome to Breaking Banks Europe, the #1 global fintech radio network. This is episode 203 in FinTech4Good, and we're focusing today on finance for farmers and a sustainable supply chain. I'm Elizabeth Kleinveld, and I have Javier Perez and Diletta Topazio with me today. So I'm going to ask you both to introduce yourselves. Why don't we go ladies first?
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Elizabeth, to be part of this to attend to this podcast. So I'm Diletta. I'm an economist at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. My background is in economics. I have a PhD in economics, and previously I have been working for the European Central Bank for the last 3 years. And now it's 3 years that I joined the FAO.
Nice. Thank you. Javier.
Hi, Liz, and hi, Diletta. Thanks for having me. I'm Javier Perez, and I'm the co-founder and COO of WØIA, a Colombian fintech working on solutions for smallholder farmers towards sustainable agriculture. Thanks for having us.
Nice. Thank you. So before we dive into the content, what do we think of, or what do you think of when we talk about FinTech for Good? And Javier, I'm going to ask you to start for this one.
Sure. And when we talk about FinTech for Good, we think it means using technology to provide financial solutions that have a sustainable impact. And by sustainable impact, we mean empowering people and improving livelihoods, and thus being able to use these solutions to transitions toward more sustainable supply chains.
Very nice. Diletta, would you say something similar, or you have another take on it?
No, yeah, I mean, just to connect to what Javier just said. So I think that FinTech for Good may help the current situation of different set of things to improve and to move forward. For example, could fill the gap of financial inclusion or supply chain traceability, as eventually we will have time to discuss in the next minutes.
Very cool, indeed. Because it does link totally to how WØIA came up with the idea of helping farmers finance their crops. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you started that journey and where you are now.
Sure, absolutely. Well, the story started a couple of years ago when WØIA started working on building a platform that offered companies supply chain traceability. It was a software as a service business. And we included also information like carbon footprint measurements. And working extensively and being able to collect enormous data on agricultural supply chains, it allowed us to identify some of the barriers, especially smallholder farmers faced in developing sustainable production processes. So one of the main issues that we found was access to agri supplies or agri inputs. It was one of the main challenges that especially small and medium-sized farmers were facing. So that's why we decided to use the information from our traceability technology to create innovative credit risk indicators to provide exactly financing for those smallholder farmers, especially financing to what we call the first mile of financing or access to agri inputs. And that's why when we came up with the Farm Now, Pay Later solution, in order to give farmers access to working capital so they can pay it with their crops or with their harvest. No interest, no monthly installments, taking into the consideration of absolutely how the agricultural process takes place. And the fact that when especially smallholder farmers plant their crops, and between harvest season, they don't have alternative sources of income. So, and one of the innovations that we developed, especially being a service for companies or cooperatives, was that the fact that we were able to mitigate loan default risk by working directly with these companies and to make sure that they guarantee crop purchases. And that's when our solution started to work out.
So just to be clear, normally these small farmers would not be able to get a loan, and this, what you're offering them, they don't have to pay interest on and all that kind of stuff because you've linked this supply chain together. It's kind of, you've done, or gone back to who's was asking you in the beginning, actually, to look at their supply chain and see how sustainable it was.
Exactly. So the reality of a smallholder farmer in Colombia and Latin America is that he or she doesn't have access to resources to buy essential agri supplies, meaning seeds, fertilizers, soil conditioners, and with that, and without those resources, it's impossible to make your assets or your land productive. So we provide those without trying or using alternative sources for risk mitigation, such as a purchase contract. And that's what we used in order to provide or to analyze the risk of loan default. And in between planting season and harvesting season, normally, especially smallholder farmers, do not have any sources of income that would allow them to pay interest rate or monthly installments. So we don't charge any of those, and we wait until the harvest season in order to collect the pre-finance. And we use, of course, the companies or that buy the crops in order to use this solution.
Just one other question, so that everybody who's listening understands, these farmers, how much do they make on average a day?
That's a very important question. Just in Colombia, we have around 2.7 million farmers. 86% of those work on informally conditions, and 78% do not have any access to credit lines or financial services. And this actually, it's very related to the fact that, according to the International Fund on Agricultural Development, 46% of the region's rural population is poor. And this hasn't changed for the last 30 years. This means that more than 50 million people are living with less than $2 a day in Latin America. That's 3 times the population of the Netherlands. People that do not have access to means of productions like seeds, fertilizers, soil conditioners. So that's how we from WÄIA see this opportunity, and to innovate in these financing solutions to tackle the problem from the first mile by providing access to good quality seeds. And with that, I think we were able to increase farmers' productivity, their economic welfare. And in other words, this would increase their daily income, which is the main issue.
That's great. Thank you. Diletta, what do you think of this solution? And have you seen other solutions like this?
Yes, I perfectly agree with Javier. So given that we are talking about Latin America, I may cite a couple of projects I've been working on. For example, financial inclusion, I think it's a big step that can be partially solved through fintech. I've been working on the Caribbean where with the aim of reducing their dependency on imports, because they are very much reliant on food imports, especially from US and Brazil. I've been working specifically on the chicken meat market, which is the main food they are consuming there. And actually, the idea was to boost local production, to substitute with local products those imported from US and Brazil. And actually, the big issue indeed was financial inclusion. So how to help the local population in building their own infrastructure, their own production capacities, and so on and so forth. So here I clearly see that fintech can help. Another thing that comes to my mind, talking about Latin America, for example, is the concept of data-driven farming, which is, again, another goal that fintech can help achieving in low and middle income countries. Here, for example, I think about how instead to best direct investment, supposing that there are some investment and that we can actually do something to improve the situation, but we need sufficient information to best direct this investment. And here again, data are fundamental, and fintech can definitely help in building some data-driven farming and providing us a clear picture of the status of things, so to enhance the impact of any euro spent to improve the situation.
So talking about data-driven farming, Javier, do you have any thoughts on whether at some point WØIA might be helping farmers to become more data-driven, or is that so long down the line because these small farmers are by nature less focused on that?
For example, what comes to my mind talking about data-driven farming is supply chain traceability as well. So we know that a lot of waste, food waste, or inefficiency, a lot of inefficiency happen across the supply chains. And of course, we need some data to figure out where this is actually happening. So here, for example, I think about the blockchain technology, which could help on the supply chain traceability. This is, again, a concept that is correlated with the data-driven farming, because, again, it's a way to produce information, but not for sake of producing information per se, but to then use this information to analyze this data and then to provide efficient solutions. So we could have, in this case, a bigger bang with the fintech. So not only to have a first order effect, so for example, improving the financial inclusion, but also to build some infrastructure which could then make this a longer term investment for the future.
Makes sense. Javier, what do you think?
I think what we've seen is that I think on a more traditional approach, you would see that if you wanted to transform or to have a data-driven agricultural process, you would target farmers directly. But what we're seeing is actually that the power of those institutions, companies that actually are the big food producers or the big supply of food agglomerators. If they transform the demand for food production and use those data, they can provide better services for farmers. I mean, when a food company that buys from thousands of smallholder farmers decides that it wants to have a more sustainable process, or that wants to use climate change certified seeds, that makes behavior in smallholder farmers change. And actually that information, and that's the way that we use it, can allow us to provide better services to the supply chain, especially to smallholder farmers. Services related to finance, to technical assistance or education, and many other services. So I think that when you see that those that have the power in the market, I mean, food companies start changing their behavior, it's easier for farmers to change their behaviors as well.
That makes sense. Diletta, I remember you talking about that example with the chickens. Can you maybe just go back to it a little bit more and tell us, what the outcome has been from that?
The chicken, you mean the Caribbean one?
Yes.
Yes, sure. So basically here, the idea was that during COVID, the Caribbean community CARICOM realized that they were very much reliant on imports, on food imports. And this, of course, is a big limit that if in case there is an economic shock could hamper the food security of the countries. So here the idea was to reduce by 2025 by 25% the import of chicken meat. Why this? Because chicken is the most consumed product in the Caribbean. And of course, to reduce this import, as we know, imposing tariff goes against the WTO
best practices.
Yes, exactly. So, and the idea, of course, would be that this increase in tariff would make the cost of food excessive for local population. So the best idea was to boost production, local production. So to substitute the imports with locally produced poultry meat. But of course, this is not something that happens one day after the other, especially if you think about little island like San Lucia or Suriname or San Tomás, which are little islands. So that's why here the financial inclusion, or in general, a strong support to local production could be fundamental, because of course we have to think about small order farming, not of big companies. We have to think about a big competitor like US or Brazil. That's why I think that fintech could be a valid support in this big and complex scenario
to help us get to that 25% reduction in 2 years.
Exactly.
Tall task. How far are they on that journey? You have any idea?
Yeah, I mean, they are a bit far from this, but
so they need more help. They need more fintech for good.
Yeah, exactly.
So now I'm going to go back to our last episode for a moment, and there we were speaking to Beryl from Oiko Credit, and what are the ways do you think that WØIA and other fintechs doing some similar things could work with the Oikos of this world? Obviously they're in the microfinance space, connected to like 300, I think, microfinancers worldwide, but would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, Liz. Well, we just saw the dimension, the scale of the problem. We're talking about 50 million people living in those conditions. So a fintech solution, and especially a new fintech solution, of course, has needs in terms of scaling up, right? And so Oiko Credit, it's the perfect institution that will enable to scale up the technology, to assess risk in different ways, and including those non-conventional guarantee tools or information tools that will allow us to provide faster and more personalized financing solutions towards smallholder farmers. So the problem is very big, and of course you need as many institutions as possible to solve this problem.
Super, thank you for that. And when we end our discussion today, I'm going to tell you offline about somebody else who I met that I think that you can help them, not on the financing side necessarily, but on the supply side, even of waste. Okay. So, because you're working with all these cooperatives, and as well as the biggest restaurant chain in Colombia. So, me from Startup Bootcamp, and I always like to ask teams, that are raising, what you are raising, why are you raising now? Can you tell us a little bit about that raise and what you're going to use the money for?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're doing this semester, actually, we're raising $600,000 in order to have a 16-month runway, and possibly trying to onboard 4,500 smallholder farmers in different regions of Colombia. And that would allow us to generate around $1.4 million in total revenue, and measure in agricultural practices around 160,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. Right now, so far this semester, we've been able to secure around 200,000 US dollars from friends and family and some angel investors. And we are in the negotiations with a couple of impact investment VCs. So we're on our way to target and finish our 600,000 goal by the end of 2023.
That's wonderful. So if you're an investor listening to this podcast, there will be the information of WØIA that you can get in touch with them directly. How do you think this is going to affect the lives of the farmers and of your end clients at the end of the day? And you did speak some to how it's going to improve their livelihood for these farmers. I know that you have at the moment some, you're doing some work with a tomato association cooperative. Can you just say a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so our first client was a tomato association in the Andean region of Colombia, near Bogota. It's still a little bit early in terms of having correlations in terms of the effect on income or productivity. But so far, by solving that barrier of access towards financial services, we've seen an increase in 6% of the tomato production productivity.
Nice.
And the association, the cooperative that we started working on, has already asked for a new farm now, pay later loan solution. So they're on their second round.
Super.
And we're capturing more data in terms of understanding if the solution is actually solving those barriers towards adequate provision of seeds and agri-foods.
And do you also see an increased willingness to buy tomatoes from these specific farmers?
Absolutely. The increase in productivity is because they were able to increase their production. So the company that usually was buying from them now has they have more supply, so they can actually sell to other companies, and that's what we're seeing. That increase in productivity is allowing them to have a bigger market.
So, what are the other kind of solutions that you think could make the most difference, and what geographies would those solutions be best suited for?
I think at the moment, especially those areas that are exposed to climate change risks, in the region we're going to see a Niño. It means a drought season. So those regions that are most vulnerable to drought season and that rely especially on short-term crops, I think that have the more potential for our solution, because we were able to supply in a timely way, in a timely manner, those agri inputs at the right moment. Because if the seeds don't get planted in a specific way, in the specific time of the year, that's going to be a whole year that the production is going to be lost, and of course, those household incomes are going to suffer. So I think it's especially those areas very exposed to the next drought season, and that are focused on production of short-term crops, have the most potential to benefit from our solution.
Thank you. Diletta, what do you think? Are there other solutions we haven't talked about that you think could be very interesting in other geographies?
I definitely agree with what Javier said. Other possible solutions, I would cite something different from a different point of view. So another value added that comes to my mind, which is slightly different from what we have been talking about. So I'm currently working on the problem of antimicrobial resistance, which is a problem which is pretty stringent, especially in low and middle income countries, that is linked to the fact that producers overuse antibiotics. And this goes directly to consumers, which purchase products and then are eating antibiotics without knowing this. And this causes a resistance. So basically, when they become ill, in case they have any illness, whatever, they go to the hospital and then they don't react to antibiotics given by the
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
How big a
Basically,
problem is
here,
this?
Yeah, this is a different problem. So here again, I see fintech as a big part of the solution. So I'm not directly talking about financing solution, but rather again about data or blockchain technology, supply chain traceability. Here also, fintech could be fundamental from a different point of view. So which is not pretty straightforward. So here, for example, through a supply chain traceability, we could understand where in the supply chain this overuse of antibiotics happens. We could gather data necessary to overcome this issue. And of course, providing eventually also a financial solution to convince producer to switch to a different production model. And so on and so forth. So this is another point of view of the same story where there are missing data, missing financial opportunities, and a big gap to be filled by FinTech4Good.
And like Javier, I think, is doing, if you start with the buyers and the buyers say, yeah, we need you to do it in a different way, and they're getting financed to actually be able to do it in a different way, to be able to buy better quality seeds or whatever it is, so that you don't have to overuse antibiotics or other things like that. Did I miss anything with that, PA?
No, I think you're in the right point, Liz. I think we from WＥIA believe that the biggest barrier towards more sustainable agriculture is finance, and especially in a region like Latin America, where food production it's actually based on smallholder farmers. So if we want to have a more sustainable agriculture, one that has a minor impact on our planet, we need to provide the mechanisms to have certified seeds, to finance sustainable agricultural practices. And I think that's where fintech comes into place, because it can develop faster, innovative ways of giving access to these new ways of production. So, and agriculture is a very high risk sector, right? We are exposed to sun and water, but we need to improve and develop more technologies that address these risks and are able to transform the way that we produce our foods on a value chain way of analysis.
Absolutely. Well, I think I have one more question. I know my time's almost up. Where will WEIA be in 5 years?
We envision WEIA leading financial services in agriculture in Latin America in 5 ways. I think that our current technology and using the fact that we're working from a demand-driven perspective would allow us to develop operations and start formalizing the way that smallholders produce foods by smart contracts, building a wider, more robust blockchain ecosystem that allow us to correct and provide more personalized finance for each smallholder farmer in the region.
Very nice. I see the link between you and Diletta, what she was talking about just here, the blockchain and the ability to see that traceability. Well, did I miss anything, or is it now my time to say thank you so much for joining us? This has been, again, a very enlightening session, FinTech4Good. I really appreciate you taking the time. It was wonderful. I met Diletta at the Milan FinTech Summit last month and immediately said to Renata, we got to get her on. And Javier, of course, I've known you since WEIA was in the Startup Bootcamp program. So it's nice when these kinds of things can bring the ecosystem together. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Liz, for having us, Diletta. Thanks for sharing. And if anyone wants to talk about fintech and sustainable agriculture, please we're here at WØIA, eager to talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with FinTech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.